I once stood in front of a man who had achieved everything the world says we should admire: wealth, influence, recognition in the press. And yet his voice trembled when he said, "No one sees me anymore. They admire what I've built, but not the man I am." That moment never left me. We live in a society that praises independence, self-sufficiency, and the ability to not care what others think. But the truth is, we do care. We're wired to care. The need to be seen, heard, and validated isn't a weakness. It's a part of our spiritual and neurological architecture. Maybe no one told you this, but your need for recognition is not vanity. It's a form of oxygen. Social neuroscience confirms what our hearts already knew. When someone genuinely acknowledges us, the brain reacts as if we just received a warm meal or found shelter in a storm. Validation activates the same reward centers as food or money. That's not coincidence. That's survival. In my early years, when I taught adults in cramped rooms with flickering lights and folding chairs, I saw again and again what recognition could do. Men and women who arrived withdrawn, ashamed, unsure, when someone in the room turned to them and said, "I see the courage in you," their posture changed, their voice gained weight. Their eyes lit up with something we forget too easily: hope. There's a reason why the greatest leaders in history weren't just skilled strategists. They were masters of recognition. Lincoln wrote personal letters to grieving mothers. Roosevelt remembered names of clerks and janitors. And Jesus, when walking through a crowd, stopped for the one forgotten woman, just to say, "Your faith has made you whole." Recognition is more than praise. It is presence. It says, "You matter. I see you." And for the soul that's been overlooked, invisible in its own home or workplace, these words are not niceties. They are salvation. So if you feel unseen today, I want to tell you this: you're not broken for needing acknowledgement. You're human, and that humanity is sacred. You don't need applause from the crowd, but you do need someone, even if it's just one voice in the dark, to look you in the eye and say, "You still matter. You still carry light." When we strip it down to the essence, recognition is not about ego. It's about connection. It's about knowing we belong somewhere, to someone. It's about hearing you're not alone in this life. I've spoken with people who endured years of neglect, emotional, relational, spiritual, and I've come to see that silence can wound just as deeply as insult. Not being noticed doesn't just sting. It can make you doubt your own existence, and that is a sorrow no one should carry. Neuroscience tells us that our brains are social organs. Just like your lungs need air, your soul needs affirmation. This is why rejection, even subtle, unspoken rejection, can trigger the same pain centers in the brain as physical injury. Yes, that sharp emptiness you feel when you're ignored, it's not in your head. It's in your wiring. But here's something powerful. We are not helpless in the face of this need, because the same circuits that long for recognition are also activated when we give recognition. That's the divine design. We heal ourselves when we bless others. I've seen it happen. A man who spent years waiting for someone to tell him he mattered. One day, he decided to become that voice for someone else. He began writing letters, small notes of encouragement to people in his building, in his church, in his workplace. A year later, he told me something I'll never forget. He said, "I was starving for recognition, but when I started recognizing others, I didn't feel empty anymore. I felt alive." There's a spiritual law at work here. As the scriptures say, "Give, and it shall be given unto you." Not just money or favors, but presence, purpose, peace. So maybe you're sitting with a silent ache right now. Maybe you wonder if anyone really sees you, if anyone notices the quiet courage it takes just to get through the day. I want you to hear this clearly. The fact that you're still here, still standing, still trying, still hoping, that matters more than you know. You are seen. If not by those around you, then by something far greater. By God, by life itself, and by those of us who know what it means to walk through invisibility and still choose kindness. You don't have to wait for applause. You don't need to perform. Your worth is not conditional. You were born already enough. There's a quiet moment that happens after someone feels seen for the first time in a long while. They don't burst into tears or shout from the rooftops. No, it's subtler than that. Their shoulders drop. Their breathing slows. The grip they've held around their own heart begins to loosen. That's the miracle of recognition. It doesn't scream. It heals. I've come to believe that one of the holiest things you can do for another human being is to look into their eyes and reflect their worth back to them, not because of what they've done, but because of who they are. You see, most people aren't chasing success. They're chasing significance. They don't want more followers. They want to be followed home by love, by sincerity, by the feeling that their life means something. That's why I've always said, the deepest craving of human nature is the desire to be appreciated, not flattered, appreciated. And there's a world of difference. Flattery is shallow. It's a pat on the back with an empty hand. But appreciation, genuine appreciation, that reaches deep, that says, "I see the effort you make when no one is watching. I see the way you carry burdens in silence. I see the way you keep showing up." When you give that kind of appreciation, you become part of someone's healing. And when you receive that kind of appreciation, even once, it can restore parts of you that years of neglect tried to erase. But what if no one around you knows how to offer that? What if you live surrounded by people too distracted or damaged to give what your soul aches for? Then you must become your own witness. Yes, I mean that. Speak to yourself the way you wish others would speak to you, not with ego, but with reverence. Begin to write down your own recognitions. Today I got out of bed even though I felt broken. That is courage. I made someone smile. That is impact. I didn't give up, even when my heart wanted to. This isn't foolishness. This is spiritual discipline. This is how we retrain the mind to see truth, not through the lens of shame, but through the eyes of grace. And slowly, you'll find that your soul begins to rise, not because others have finally noticed, but because you stopped waiting for permission to validate your existence. That, my friend, is where the real strength begins. There's a reason why the scriptures remind us to love our neighbor as ourselves, not above ourselves, not below, as. Because we cannot give what we refuse to claim within. You cannot offer true recognition if you deny your own right to be seen. And yet, how many of us were taught the opposite? That to acknowledge our own worth was arrogance, that to speak kindly to ourselves was self-indulgence. We were told to stay humble, but no one taught us that humility without self-respect becomes self-erasure. So here's the paradox. To become someone who lifts others, you must first be willing to rise within. You don't need the world's spotlight, but you do need the inner flame. That steady sense of, I am here, I am real, and I matter, whether anyone claps or not. And you'll discover that when you live from that center, your presence becomes a sanctuary. Others feel safe with you because you are no longer seeking to be filled. You are offering from overflow. I remember once a woman shared with me how invisible she felt after her divorce. Years of giving, supporting, building, and suddenly she was a name erased from holiday lists, a presence forgotten at family tables. She said, I felt like a ghost, like the only proof I had ever existed was in someone else's story, and now that story had ended. But one day she walked past a mirror, paused, and whispered, I'm still here. That became her practice. Every morning she would look at her reflection and say those words aloud, not with bitterness, with quiet reverence. Months later, her voice changed, her laughter returned, not because someone came to rescue her, but because she remembered she was worth saving by her own breath, her own belief. My friend, your soul is not a marketing campaign. It doesn't need likes or shares to exist. It needs light. It needs compassion. It needs truth. So, if no one tells you today, I see you, I honor what you've endured, I recognize the beauty you carry, the resilience, the tenderness, the unwavering heartbeat that kept going when everything said stop. And maybe, just maybe, part of your purpose is to be the mirror for someone else too. To say to them, you're still here, and that means your story is not over. In fact, it's just beginning. You are not invisible. You are infinite. What if I told you that one of the greatest acts of power is not to dominate, but to recognize, to see another soul and affirm its sacredness? This is the essence of spiritual leadership, not command, but compassion, not control, but clarity. And this begins with a shift in how we perceive presence. In a world addicted to noise, to visibility, to applause, presence has become a performance. But true presence is stillness. It is the decision to listen without agenda, to observe without judgment, to speak only when your words are rooted in love, not in fear. That kind of presence changes rooms. It changes relationships. It changes lives. You don't have to be rich to offer it. You don't have to be educated, charismatic, or even healed. You just have to be aware. Aware that every person you encounter carries an invisible burden, that every conversation is a doorway to healing if you're willing to enter it with humility. Recognition isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a glance that says, "I understand." A pause that says, "Take your time." A silence that says, "You don't have to explain your pain to be worthy of care." I've watched miracles unfold in those silent moments. A teenager lost in shame, softened because someone called him by his name with kindness. A widower holding back tears finally wept because someone dared to sit beside him without offering advice. A woman battling burnout stood up straighter because someone said, "You've been holding so much. I admire your strength." Recognition isn't about fixing people. It's about reminding them they were never broken. And this, I believe, is the great invitation of our time, to move beyond surface connection and step into sacred acknowledgement, to stop waiting for grand gestures of validation and start practicing small, holy acts of presence every day, with yourself, with others. So let this be your practice. When you wake up tomorrow, before you check the world's messages, look inward and whisper to your own soul, "I see you, I'm here with you, and you matter to me." That is not weakness. That is power. That is healing. That is how we stop surviving and start truly living. And from this inner sanctuary, we begin to recognize the divine, not just in temples and books, but in each other, in every unseen hand, in every tired smile, in every silent, sacred yes. I often reflect on the men and women who walked into my classrooms over the years. They didn't come looking for fame or fortune. Most of them weren't trying to impress anyone. They were simply trying to be whole again, to remember who they were before the noise of the world drowned out their inner voice. And in each of them, I saw a recurring pattern, a soul aching for recognition, not because they were self-centered, but because they had spent too long shrinking themselves just to be accepted. They had dimmed their light to make others comfortable. They had silenced their truth to avoid conflict. And somewhere along the way, they had forgotten that their presence alone was a gift. If that resonates with you, I want you to know it's not too late to return, to reclaim the parts of yourself you exiled in exchange for belonging. You don't need to become louder. You need to become more true. And truth often begins in solitude. There is sacred power in stepping away from the world's expectations to simply sit with your soul, to close your eyes and ask, "Who am I when no one is watching? What do I long for?" Not because it's trendy, but because it's real. The answers won't always come quickly. Sometimes they rise like a whisper. But if you listen long enough, they will come. And when they do, you'll start to feel the subtle shift from seeking recognition to embodying it. Because the most magnetic people are not those who demand attention, they are those who honor themselves so deeply the world cannot help but take notice. So today, if you feel unseen, misunderstood, or unappreciated, let that ache guide you back to the deeper truth. You were never meant to be validated by the fleeting winds of opinion. You were meant to be rooted in the eternal soil of worth. And every time you choose to stand in that worth, with gentleness, with grace, with fierce compassion, you become a lighthouse, a signal to others that it's safe to do the same. That is recognition at its highest form, not applause from the world, but alignment with your soul. And now we arrive at the heart of it all. Not just the science of validation, not merely the emotional need for recognition, but the sacred truth that echoes through every faith, every philosophy, every soul that has ever cried out in the silence. You are known. You are not forgotten. There is a verse I return to often, a quiet whisper from the Psalms. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely. That, my friend, is the deepest recognition there is, to be fully seen by a presence that loves without condition and listens without fatigue. You don't need to strive for this recognition. You don't need to prove anything. The divine sees you already. In your tears, in your courage, in your quiet acts of kindness when no one is watching. This isn't poetic sentiment. It's the root of our restoration. Because when you know, not believe, but know that you are seen by something greater than your circumstances, you begin to walk differently. You begin to carry yourself not with arrogance, but with peace, not with noise, but with presence. And suddenly, the external recognition becomes a bonus, not a necessity. You are no longer begging the world to tell you that you matter. You are reminding the world by the way you live. So from this day forward, let every act of attention, every word of affirmation, every silent gaze, every moment of stillness become a prayer, a recognition of the sacred in yourself and in others. And when you pass someone who looks tired, who looks like they haven't heard "you matter" in far too long, be the voice, be the mirror, be the gentle hand on the shoulder that says, "I see you, I honor you, your life has meaning." That is how we rise. That is how we heal. Not in fame, not in noise, but in presence, in truth, in love made visible. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to start.